Amen. Ladies, tell me you don't look like ladies. Votes for women. Yeah, I've been picketing about votes for women since 1885. And do we have the right to vote yet? No. Are we citizens of this country? Yes, we are. Do we not have any brains? No, yes, we do. Little whippersnappers. So what are we going to do about it? We're going to picket some more. Votes for women. If women had the right to vote, this would be a different country, I tell you. And we need the right to vote so we can vote in that guy, the Woody Wilson guy, because he kept the U.S. out of the war. We need him in office. And are the men going to vote for him? They just like to go fighting. I don't think so. So, let's go. Votes for women. Yeah. Votes for women. Yeah. Okay. You youngsters need to keep it up because I'm getting tired. Need to go take a nap. Okay. Vote for women. Yeah. Vote for women. Yeah. Vote for women. Yeah.
Okay. Now we get to talk about the fun stuff. World War I. That's pretty blurry. Can we make that more bright?
You can turn off the lights.
Ah, excellent. All right. Attention. Okay, you may be seated. Thank you. I'll recruit you later. You can come by my office later. Thank you. We're going to talk about World War I today. The people at the time didn't know they were going to have another World War about 20 years later, so they called it the War to End All Wars. They need a better name. More commonly known as the Great War. World War I saw battlefields in Asia, the Pacific, Africa, and the Middle East, but the most famous of what we're going to talk about is the battlefields of Europe. Of course, the Europe of 1914 looks a lot different than the Europe we would think of today. Just some simple things. We would expect a lot of smaller countries here, and the Middle East to have a lot of smaller countries. Instead, we see that land occupied by already large empires, such as Russia, Germany, or old empires that don't even exist, such as Austria-Hungary, Persia, or the Ottoman Empire, which is now only Turkey. In fact, we're going to focus on two specific countries that are very important to the start of World War I. You may think, okay, that was probably Germany and Russia, or Germany and anybody else, but it's actually going to be two countries in this region, specifically Austria-Hungary and Serbia. Like Austria-Hungary, that's a weird name. It's actually two kingdoms, the Kingdom of Austria and the Kingdom of Hungary, that are ruled by one king. And we're going to zoom in a little bit here. There you go, much better. It's like there are three different color shadings here. What's that for? Well, this one's the Kingdom of Austria, this one's the Kingdom of Hungary, and this little guy here, that was once the country of Bosnia. In the last war, Austria-Hungary took it over and took it for itself. And Serbia was not happy because it's good friends with Bosnia. And we're going to focus on one very specific event in the Bosnian capital, Sarajevo. Because this is Franz Ferdinand. He was to be the next king of Austria-Hungary. And the Serbs and Bosnians did not like him because, well, he didn't like them. And they knew if he became the next king, life was going to become more difficult for the already miserable Serbians and Bosnians living in Austria-Hungary. And you can kind of tell what's coming. But before we get there, we're going to talk about some alliances. Before World War I, a bunch of different countries got together and said, hey, we're going to form a big group. Because if we form a big enough group, no one's going to want to attack us. But there were two different groups that tried to form alliances. The Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, which have been allies for the last 30 years, as a much newer group of France, Russia, and Great Britain. And you notice the blues, we'll just call it the blue team and the red team. But officially they were known as the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. Entente is just a French word that means agreement because it was the French who came up with this agreement. Now, this would have been the point where I'd have got all my favorite people up and we would have done this skit to explain to you the politics of World War I. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do that, so I will just have to briefly sum up why World War I happened, which is not an easy task. In the last war, Austria-Hungary took over Bosnia. Bosnia is friends with Serbia, so Serbia got mad. And when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand visited Bosnia, in an open-top car, this guy wasn't very smart, in a big area where there are not a lot of people that liked him, it went about as well as you would expect. He got shot by a Serbian national, and Austria-Hungary was infuriated, blaming the Serbian government, claiming they had something to do with it. And they probably did. So they sent an ultimatum to Serbia with 10 demands, saying if you don't do these in a month, we're going to declare war. These weren't possible. Austria-Hungary gave these demands not to solve a solution, but to provoke war. Serbia did all of them but one, but it wasn't enough. Austria-Hungary declared war a month later. Now Russia decided to help Serbia. Why? Because Russia, down here there's Black Sea and these little straits. Well, Russia gets a lot of imports here, but they don't control this area. So they wanted some friends in this region to make sure they could keep this area open so they could get supplies. Serbia was one of their last friends. If Austria-Hungary took Serbia, Russia would have no more friends and his enemies could just take it and they would have no more supplies. So they said, Serbia, we'll help you out. Germany and Austria-Hungary said, all right, well, we're going to go up against you. If you fight, you're going to have to fight all three of us. Of course, Russia had their own friends. So this was a big setup for war. And each country in Europe started to make their alliances. When every country had made their decision, this is where they stood. Italy changed sides. That's interesting. Italy had decided to stay neutral at first. When everyone was making their decision, Italy said, you know what, I'm just going to stay out of this war. But then France and Great Britain, they said, hey, Italy, we got a sweet deal. If you join our side, then after the war, we'll give you this little bit of Austria-Hungary. And then Italy's like, sign me up. I'm on your team. Now, Germany and Austria-Hungary were all alone against 4 major countries. So they got themselves a couple of friends too. So we have the Central Powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Turkey, otherwise known as the Ottoman Empire, against all these allies, Russia, Great Britain, France, Italy, Serbia, of course, plus a couple of smaller countries, Greece, Romania, Montenegro. And this was where war was ready to start. And this is where I briefly talk about what actually went on in the war. The red is obviously the countries, the red team, blue team. Russia's purple, we'll get to that in a little bit. But these orange regions, that's as far as the red team was able to take over. Down here, they managed to take over everything. So Serbia just lost. Austria-Hungary attacked once, Serbia pushed them back. They attacked a second time, Serbia pushed them back. So now all the other big powers are thinking, Austria-Hungary's big, they got a lot of territory, they got a lot of men, but their soldiers aren't that good. Serbia is just whooping them over and over again. So Austria-Hungary, really embarrassed, has to ask Germany for help. They get the new ally, Bulgaria, and then with all 3 countries attacking, Serbia was finally overtaken. Most of their troops retreated, and Great Britain picked them up, and they retreated back to the Allies. Here, well, each country had their own plan. Germany's plan was called the Schlieffen Plan. They were going to send 90% of their troops through Belgium into France, surround Paris, get a quick victory, and rush all their troops back to Russia. 90% just sounds like a number, but there's about 20, or we'll say there's 20 of us. So if we were the German army, all of us would go fight Russia, and we would leave David and Luke left. They would be the only ones to fight Russia if Russia came. Like, how could you send so many people to attack one country when there's the other one with the huge army ready to come in? Well, Russia was not known for being fast. They didn't have a lot of trains. They had a lot of people, but they were spread out over their huge empire, which goes way beyond this map. So they didn't have the capability to bring in a lot of troops quickly to the border. But they knew war was coming, so they had their troops ready beforehand. So Germany invades through Belgium, which was neutral, by the way. Belgium had said, hey, we're not going to fight the war. Everyone knows we're neutral. We're fine. And then Germany says, France has a lot of forts here. We don't want to go there. Belgium, let us through, or we're coming through. And the Belgians said, you shall not pass. And the Germany's like, whatever, we're coming through anyway. And they did. But the Belgians bravely held the line. They let the British bring their troops and the French bring their troops. And they held the Germans for a little while. The Germans made it this far, almost to Paris, which is right here. But that was when a gap opened up in the German lines. Now, when we were playing Capture the Flag, if you had all your people right on your border to keep everyone back, well, if there's a gap, someone can come through. Except in Capture the Flag, you can just tag them and they can't do anything about it. In war, everyone's fighting. So if all your troops are facing this way and there's a gap, the enemy can bring in troops to attack you from the side, or even worse, from behind. The Germans couldn't let that happen, so they had to pull back. And when they pulled back, the Allies attacked. And Germany had to pull back even farther, and the Allies attacked. And they pushed them all the way to about right this line, just inside Belgium. And that's when the Germans did something strange. They dug a hole in the ground. A lot of them. The first trenches of World War I. And from the rest of the war, the Allies and the Germans were stuck in trenches here. So let's get to Russia. Why is Russia purple? They were on the blue team, right? Everyone else here is blue. Russia didn't make it that long. They attacked very quickly. Germany pushed them out. But Russia didn't have good supplies. If Tate, Rachel, and Hope, they were a Russian patrol. They go out. They have one rifle. For all three of them. Tate gets the rifle. If he gets shot, Rachel gets the rifle. If Rachel gets shot, Hope gets the rifle. If Hope gets shot before Tate, that's just too bad. But that means they didn't have enough supplies. They didn't even have the capability to send their messages coded. So when one general was telling a general, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to attack the Germans here, and here's what we're going to do. The Germans could just listen in and be like, yeah. Hey, I know exactly what the Russians are going to do. They're going to attack here and here at this time with this many troops. So the Germans hit them and wiped out an entire Russian army. They lost 10,000 troops. The Russians, 180,000. So after that great defeat, Germany and Austria-Hungary only took this orange, and Russia surrendered. The people started to rise up. They were tired of not eating, not having a good life, and they went up against the Russian ruler and said, you know what, we're tired, this is it, we give in. And for the next 6 years, Russia has a civil war. So Russia surrenders, and Germany says, all right, if you surrender, give us all this purple territory. And Russia's like, well, we can't stop you, so take it. So this is, you'd think Germany's going to win the war. They've gotten this far and stopped. They've got all of this. They defeated Russia. So what's going to happen now? Well, they try and open up new fronts. They try and get their friends to go down here. It's not on the map. Go down here, attack British. Egypt. Didn't work. They're going to try, the British tried to come and attack here. Didn't work. So that was about it. This was when it became a war, not of who's going to take over the other country, but who's going to last longest. Russia fell first. Then it was Turkey, because the British were starting to come up and take their territories. Turkey said, you know what, I want to keep my empire, so I'm going to surrender now. Bulgaria was next, because the Allies came into Greece, started taking ground, and Bulgaria was on their own. They knew they could only stop them slowly, but they were going to be wiped out just like Belgium, so they gave in. They surrendered. So now with the Allies closing in on Austria-Hungary and Italy closing in on Austria-Hungary, Austria-Hungary surrendered as well, and Germany was the lone power until the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, when Germany finally surrendered and ended the war.
Did they do that on purpose?
They did do that on purpose. Okay, war's over, we're done. It's just another European war. Europe's been fighting for centuries, you know, who cares? What makes this war different? This war was different because of the inventions. Each side was able to bring new inventions to the war that were never seen before, such as the airplane. It was invented in 1907, but the Great War was the first war to see airplanes in combat, and there were even going to be bombers by the end of the war. You saw it come up early. The tank. This was an idea of Winston Churchill. That is not good. Okay, the tank, anyway, was an idea of Winston Churchill to try and rush over the trenches and break the stalemate, go through the German lines. Didn't work out as well as he'd hoped, just like my PowerPoint's not working as well as I hoped. Okay.
Perseverance.
Yeah. Don't stop fighting. Okay, we're just going to keep going. I was going to show you a close. Yeah, there we go. I knew you would cooperate. Where were we? Ah, yes. Now we're back here. This is a close-up. This is the first picture of the first tank, the British Mark V. It's beautiful. Okay. Then we have the machine gun. The British invented the machine gun a couple hundred years ago, and they used it in Africa already, but this was the first war that had them commonly available to both sides. Well, except Russia, because they didn't have all these supplies. But the Allies weren't the only ones bringing new inventions. Germany was also bringing in new inventions to try and turn the tide of the war, such as the Flammenwerfer, or the flamethrower. It was originally designed in the 700s, but the Germans were the ones to first invent the modern flamethrower. And the Unterseeboot, or the submarine, this was very important for the Germans. Because remember, actually I didn't say this, Great Britain had blockaded Germany's ports, so Germany couldn't get any supplies. The people started starving. What are they going to do? Germany wants to do the same thing to Britain, but they can't get their ships out. So they get the submarine to go under the British blockade and start sinking a bunch of Allied convoys and ships. The most famous sunk ship was the RMS Lusitania. We mentioned that last week. It was not the cause of the U.S. going to war, though, and we'll get to that later, hopefully. And then lastly, but definitely not least, was gas attacks. Germans put chlorine gas in their shells as early in 1950. They would launch them over into the trenches, and the smoke would carry the chlorine gas over the troops. If you didn't have a gas mask, which gas masks were also first invented in the World War because that was the only way you were going to survive, you could drown on dry land because of the gas. Your lungs would fill with liquid just because of breathing in this gas. It was terrible. It killed hundreds of thousands, millions, and the Allies were forced to use it as well not too long after. Oh yes, a brief moment for family ties. Kaiser Wilhelm II, the ruler of Germany, King George IV of Great Britain, and Tsar Nicholas of Russia. Notice how similar these two guys look. They're even wearing similar uniforms. I would forgive you if you said, Squirrel, you just put two pictures of the same guy up there. Okay, that's messed up. You messed up your PowerPoint. Admit it, you messed up. But those are actually two different people because all three of these, the leaders of the main powers, were cousins, grandsons of Queen Victoria. Now back to the war. Ah yes, the U.S. joins a letter sends the U.S. to war. Well, that's kind of true. It was not the Lusitania. Keep the U.S. out of the war, guys. Never mind. It doesn't work out. Because Germany, this is a very interesting political cartoon they put out. Because Germany's ambassador, Arthur Zimmerman, sent a telegram to the German ambassador in Mexico. The British intercepted it, read it, and are like, oh snap, America needs to read this. We did, and we're like, that's it, war. Why? We weren't at war yet, but Germany said, hey, Mexico, we're getting a little concerned about the U.S. In case they join the war, we'll give you a lot of money if you'll join. And you know what? When we win, we'll give you Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Sounds like the same deal France and Britain tried to give Italy. But the British intercepted it, so Mexico never heard, but we were outraged. So we decided to join the war. And fun fact, people thought the Lusitania was it, but the Lusitania was sunk in 1915. We joined the war in 1917. Also, between then, in those 2 years, at least 10 American ships, clearly American ships, were sunk by the Germans. Well, the Germans actually they weren't concerned about us. At the beginning of the war, the Germans were making their plans. Okay, we have to take out France, we have to take out Russia. Great Britain doesn't have a small army. And it's like, one of the guys is like, well, what about America? And they're like, America? Who cares? If they join the war, they're going to make no difference. Like, really? America? Like, we're huge. Our current army is like 3 million. At the time, our active army was only 100,000. Remember the tiny country of Bulgaria? They had a bigger army than we did. That's sad, guys. So Germany didn't care. But when we joined the war, by 1918, we had brought up 5 million people into the army. And we were sending 10,000 into Europe every month at the end of the war. Also, the war was a great economy booster for us. The exports, the materials we would send to other countries, they were about 2.4 billion in 1913. But by the end of the war, they were almost tripled, getting up to 6.4 billion. And that's also important for the end of the war. And we're not there yet because Great Britain and the U.S. were the only countries after the war to still have stable or better economies. Because France and Russia and Germany, the war was fought on their land. So after the war, their people are hungry. They spend a lot of money on the war. But then they have to spend all this money to rebuild their cities. The cities that got bombed and destroyed. So that's a lot of money and a lot of time. And they were ruined. It took them a long time. But Great Britain, no fighting on their soil, they're fine. They actually got rich selling supplies to other countries. And so did we. Because all we had to do was send our troops over there And we got rich selling supplies to the other countries, to countries like Russia, who need it so badly. Oh yes, this is interesting. Remember how I said today we would expect a lot of smaller countries? Well, here they are. After World War I, when Germany surrendered, the main countries got together and said, Germany, you have to sign this treaty, and we're going to make sure you can never start a war again. You can't have an air force, so no planes. You can only have an army. You can have a really small army, because we know you need one. And you can't, well, there were a bunch of other things they did and that made Germany mad. It also gave away some of their territory to France. So they got to keep a little bit over here, but then the rest of it was given to a new country called Poland. Like, well, why didn't they do a treaty to Austria-Hungary? I mean, they were the ones who started the war, right? Well, they just decided, you know what, we'll just make Austria-Hungary a lot of countries. So they gave a little bit of land to Poland, a little bit to Romania, 3 new countries, Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Hungary. So now they made them 2 separate countries. And Yugoslavia. Remember how Serbia and Bosnia were friends? Well, now they and some of the other people, they get to make their own country after the war. So in a way, it was a win for the Serbians, because what they wanted at the very beginning, to be the same country with their friends and the same people, the Bosnians, at the end of the war, they got it. So World War I, in a way, it was a win for the people who started. Unfortunately, it ruined the rest of the countries. And even Russia. Remember how Germany took all of this territory? Well, most of it was made for a new country, and 3, 4 new countries that weren't there before. So that's just a little bit of interesting how politics and wars, it doesn't just change the next wars because of the technology, but also because of the countries and how it changes it and puts restrictions. Oh, yes, and there were certain soldiers in World War I that we will be seeing again because they are leaders for World War II. Joseph Stalin, infantryman of Russia, who also served with the Russian Reds in the Civil War. Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty of Great Britain. But unless you're familiar with British naval ranks, he was basically the political leader of the British Navy. And FDR, who would be the president during World War II, he was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. I believe. Do I have a little more time for this? Do I have a little more time?
Sure.
Okay. That's for you. I'm going to go all the way down to the end.
Okay.
For the story.
Oh, wow.
That was a lot. Yes, him. I have a story from a book which I did not bring to the front. Or bring with me in the class. May I have a few minutes to get it from my truck?
Yes, we are.
We will have a brief interruption from our sponsor.
You need a hair mask, or you're gonna go to jail. Wear a mask. It's a mandate. Don't you care about the sick people? It's a pandemic. Wear a mask or go to jail. What do you want?
Well, it actually wasn't jail because everybody was released. Released mostly everybody.
This isn't the future. This is 1918, thank you. The war got over, and the boys came home, and they brought the Spanish flu. And our expert is in the back holding a squirrel, not coming up to read us a story. Priority, whippersnapper. Wear mask! Wear mask! I dropped it on the floor, but that doesn't matter. Wear mask!
I think they wanted me to wear that or go to jail. Fortunately, I was back there with the squirrel, so I got away from it. Lights, please. Found this. Lights, please.
You want to hop?
Yeah. I can read. Thank you very much.
in the dark all the time.
I have this book called Best Little Stories from World War I. It's a lot of interesting stuff, which included the story of how the 3 main leaders were cousins. But I found this one about this soldier here. It's titled Messenger Man. It'll only take a few minutes. Lowly in rank and self-effacing, he was a runner for his regiment. That meant trotting, sometimes sprinting or crawling, through shot and shell while carrying dispatches from headquarters behind the lines, sometimes a mile or so, up to the very front trenches. In one battle, the regiment began with a full complement of 3,000 men. It departed the battlefield with 500, still able to fight another day. Our hero emerged that time without a scratch, despite duties so dangerous that 2 men would go on a message at a time, the assumption being one would be killed along the way. By all accounts, he was a good soldier, cautious, sensible, quite fearless. He won every medal and decoration available, but never rose above the rank of corporal, and never applied for promotion. Notes biographer Robert Payne. He once wrote a friend about his job as a dispatch runner. What did he say? He said, in which is sick, during the first day of the attack, 3 of us 8 dispatch runners were killed, and 1 was badly wounded. Those same odds again. 1 of every 2 runners eliminated. Not always true. Not in every battle, but then, what's the equation for any one man whose number of battles goes up and up and up? In any case, in the same action, the officers were debating how to reward their brave dispatch runners. So 4 company commanders were summoned to the headquarters dugout. That meant 4 of us had to step out. We were standing some distance away about 5 minutes later when a shell slammed into the dugout. The shell wounded the regiment's Lieutenant Colonel Philip Engelhardt, while also killing or wounding all of his staff. And years later, our hero's same Colonel Engelhardt would recall the young dispatch runner and another enlisted man, an orderly, had positioned themselves in such a way to protect me with their bodies from the machine gun fire to which I was exposed. Another time, dispatch runner was asked to cross ground so heavily covered by machine gun fire, he was promised another Medal of Valor in advance of undertaking such a suicidal mission. He did it, and he added the latest decoration to his list of awards and medals. Always running, darting, dashing, he would not pass through 4 years on the front totally unscathed, it must be acknowledged. At the Somme in 1916, he was sitting in a dugout with 11 or 12 fellow soldiers. A shell fell among them. 4 men were killed outright, 6 hideously wounded. Our man? Shrapnel injury to the face. It was minor enough to allow him to stay at the front. The war, after all, was his life. Just days later, he volunteered for an especially risky-looking message run during an enemy artillery barrage. Typically, 2 men are sent. This time, our man was not the lucky runner who got through. But he wasn't killed either. Down by a shell fragment that struck his upper left leg, he was sent home for recuperation. And just a few months later, he was back at the front and disturbing the sleep of his friends in the trenches by stabbing the hated pervasive rats with his bayonet. The war proceeded. In March of 1918, his unit, starving for supplies of all kinds, in a heavily shelled sector, he and a companion crawled out from the trenches one night in search of food and water. The friend cut a chunk of meat from the hindquarters of a dead horse, and our hero filled a gasoline can with water he found puddled in a shell hole. They carried both treasures back to their comrades in the trenches. Then in October of 1918 came a great gas attack not far from Belgium. Remember I was talking about that? Because it's chlorine, sent wafting among the trenches, and artillery shells that landed from eventide until midnight. The men in the trenches wore gas masks, but they were primitive devices at best. Our man, eyes burning, set off with the dispatch the next morning, about 7 o'clock. But it was to be his last one. Gas had gotten him, and 2 days later he lay, spent in a hospital, totally blind. But fortunately for him, the doctors had dealt with chlorine before. It was the war's most deadly gas, and its victims could convulse and die within minutes. They could also suffer permanent blindness. Our man, an aspiring artist of sorts before the war, was one of the lucky few who survived without much lasting damage. His life did change, though. The pain in the eyeballs passed away, and within a week he was able to distinguish dim shapes. But as he lay in the hospital bed, it occurred to him that he would never be able to paint again. And in fact, except for a few sketches, he never did. He suffered depression, sometimes turning his face to the wall and speaking to no one. He appeared to recover, but at first it was just to resume the same old aimless existence that had characterized his life before the war. Home again, he acted as an informer for his defeated country's army, first infiltrating and reporting on Bolsheviks, then on a small grassroots workers' party. And who knows what might have developed if he hadn't been sent to spy for the army about that same tiny political splinter. As it was, some unpredictable demon at last came to the fore in our selfless hero, as he took over the party himself, as it then grew under his ruthless direction and took over his country, as it in turn rearmed and took over much of adjoining Europe. What if our deeply disturbed messenger had not escaped so many close calls and repeated dangers during World War I? What if this man, beyond all others of his day and age, had not survived? This man, Adolf Hitler. Asks us a lesson. The people of one war, we think sometimes it doesn't matter, but just small little instances like that can totally redefine life for the next generation. A lot of American generals from the next war. Oh yes, here's our army. I kind of left you hanging. A lot of the main generals and officers of the next World War would be men who fought and saw the devastation of the First World War, and it certainly affected how they viewed it.
Well done. Well done. And when you see Daniel later, you can sing happy birthday to him if you want. His birthday's tomorrow. He's turning 18. So he's got to be an adult from now on. Oh. So last week we talked about the good, which wasn't a lot to say. We talked about the bad, and we have continued talking about the bad. Now it's time to talk about the weird. The rest of this decade just got worse. Do you have any idea how many people died total in the war?
They don't know.
I don't know.
Because in Russia, they had a lot of people desert, but the Russians wanted to hide the numbers. So even now, even the casualties of civilians, because people would bomb places and a lot of people would just live there. They weren't fighting, but they would die, and the people just didn't know how many people, normal people died. So it was millions.
Well, after the war, the men were coming home. Finally. Now, this is a world war, so it's countries all over the world fighting each other, and so it's soldiers coming back to countries all over the world. The problem is, they were bringing germs with them. Something called the Spanish flu. Now, that's not weird, that's tragic. The Spanish flu killed millions and millions of people. It's estimated it killed more people than the war. The soldiers came home, they started getting sick. It was very, very contagious, and it went like crazy. Now, you may be thinking, wait a second, wasn't that like 3 years ago? The 2020 pandemic was very similar to the pandemic in 1918. It's ironic that it was almost exactly 100 years from the one to the other. Started with a bird. So we've got a bad marker. Okay. Good marker. All right. 1918 flu and the 2020 flu. Let's take a look at it. This one was called the Spanish flu, and it was a H1N1 virus. Anybody know what the ours was? Which H is on the list?
COVID-19.
COVID-19. So ours is COVID-19, and it had a fancy scientific whatever to it too. Okay. The numbers. What's the difference? The Spanish flu around the world, 500 million people caught this. 500 million. So the ones that caught it, 500 million. How many people caught COVID? 601 million. Now, you're like, ooh, more people caught COVID than, but remember the population of the world 100 years ago was way smaller. So percentage-wise, probably more on this side than on this side. How many people died? And this is where it's wow. 50 million people. That is an astonishing number of people. It'd be like the whole East Coast gone. 50 million people died. How many people died of COVID? Well, the numbers say 6.49 million. So this is 10 out of every 100 people who got it died. Over here, 1. So when the news was telling you it's the same, it's just as bad, oh my goodness, this is so tragic and so terrible, you can make numbers say pretty much whatever you want them to say. That's why often we talk about think deeper, go beyond the rhetoric, go beyond what they're telling you, and dig into what the real story is. So this is like 1%. This is 10%. Okay, now what about the U.S.? How many people died in the U.S.? For the Spanish flu, it was 675,000. That's a lot. That's a lot of people to die in one country. Now remember, our population was 1/3 of what it is now. So maybe 100 million people, and this many died. That's a lot. But if you were watching the news, they talked about when the U.S. crossed over to having as many deaths as during the pandemic of 1918. We did indeed. The numbers for the U.S. for this one were 1 million. However, let's do some thinking about this. Those of you who are math people. 1 million. That's an astonishing rate of people. The total of the whole entire world is 6.5 million. So how is it that we have 1/6 of the entire world's death, whereas down here we have 1/50th? See, maybe somebody's playing with these numbers a little bit. So I looked it up, and in comparison to other countries, it's an astonishing difference. Nobody's claiming 1 million. Nobody's even close. Brazil had like 600 and something thousand, and then after that it was like way down, like 100,000, 20,000, way down. So if you were keeping track when this was all happening, they were marking deaths to like if somebody died of a heart attack, but they happened to have COVID. If somebody died of a stroke, but they happened to have COVID, that counts, yes.
My grandfather had COVID, but he also had stage 4 cancer, I think, and then he got pneumonia when he had COVID, so it was kind of a lot of stuff.
Exactly, and he would be counted as a COVID number. Whatever happened to him would count as a COVID number. That's the way America was doing it. So there are a lot of numbers, this one, that are kind of like, that feels a little more political than accurate, but I'll leave that to you to figure out what the truth is and what isn't. All right, so these were some of the differences. What were some of the similarities? I can't wait to show you all this. This just amazes me. Now, this is not a similarity. Oh, okay. There we go. This was during the war. You notice she's wearing a gas mask. And this was actually something that somebody invented. It's a baby carriage that is sealed. You see the little window and the little chimney thing so that the baby can breathe in case we get attacked by gas. I'm not sure where in the world this was, but that poor woman and that poor baby, probably claustrophobic for the rest of his life. Okay, the pandemic comes. We are not prepared for this. Nobody in the world is prepared for this. And all of a sudden, people are just dropping. It was the soldiers who got it first. It started at a military camp. And it's like, wait a second, what's going on? People are just dropping. They're getting sick and they're dying. Just like boom, boom, within days. It was a huge thing. So makeshift hospitals needed to just rise up out of who knows where. People needed to jump in and help. You know, let's try and do what we can. Everybody was in a state of emergency, like the whole world, because this was the worst pandemic, and it was everywhere. I mean, maybe not in like a village in China, but, you know, on a global scale. So you've got this looks like a gym, or maybe I don't even know what it is, but they're setting up beds, they're setting up little blankets in between them or sheets or something to try and, you know, help with keep the spread down or whatever. So what are we going to do? People are dying, yeah.
Wait a minute, so they just finished World War I.
Yes.
They got the Spanish flu that killed 50 million people.
Mm-hmm.
And then 20 years later, they had enough people to have another war.
Isn't that astonishing? Yeah.
What about the Great Depression?
We're going to get there.
Right.
So, you know, we got more to talk about for sure. Okay, now, some similarities. I was shocked to find that humanity, we tend to react in the same way. We've talked about how history repeats itself. And in the Bible, way back thousands of years ago, a very wise man named Solomon once said, there is nothing new under the sun. Things kind of roll around, but I was shocked at how much some of these things, I had to look at the dates to be sure. Okay, so first one, if I fail, he dies. So let's start with the guilt trips. These women are wearing masks, they're offering themselves, they're sacrificing themselves and risking everything, but they're telling themselves, I have to do a good job or their blood is on my hands. Here's a newspaper. Look up here, it's October 11th, 1918. Non-essentials may be ordered to close. That sound familiar? I had to check the date because I was like, surely that's from 2020. Okay, we're going to close the non-essentials. Then we got all the rules. Don't do this, do this, don't cough on people, don't bend your head toward the ground if you have to cough. Don't put pencils or fingers in your mouth. That's a good idea. Okay. Then we also had things that were going to help, like cigarettes. They're going to smoke out the flu. Oh boy. Remember, just because it's advertised does not mean it's good. Okay. There were lots of things like that. It was actually really funny. There was this one thing you could put on your nose, and it was connected to this machine by this tube, and I guess you're supposed to breathe it. They were like, prevention is better than, getting it. Didn't we hear a bunch of that? Oh, prevent it. Try this, when really nobody knows. We're all just guessing here. But this one says, the medicated smoke disinfects the air passages that cannot be reached any other way than my cigarettes. It eliminates the annoyance of dosing the system with drugs that upset the stomach. Yeah. Thank you very much. And at the very beginning, it says a sensible way of relieving the grip, which is what some of them called it, influenza, colds, something I've never heard of in my life, hay fever, sore throat, and all other ailments that require direct and immediate application in order to get instant relief. Thank you very much. Why are they not selling them today? I don't know. All right, here's a good one. Go home and go to bed until you're well. Does that sound familiar? Stay home, save lives. Stay home. Okay, thanks. Schools, churches, theaters closed. It was a thing back then, too. We need to shut everything down. And so people are like, wait a minute, you're infringing on our rights. You shouldn't be closing down the churches. Now we're starting to it's getting scary. But this wasn't the only one. I'm not just picking one. Here's another one. Churches, schools, shows closed. All public assemblies are banned. Public places are ordered closed. Stay home. Mandatory mask mandate. What in the world? Seriously? So if you aren't staying home, you gotta wear a mask. Barbers, cover their faces. Yeah, that's a good idea. Why are they going to the barbers if everything's shut down? Is that essential? Fight the flu. Quarantine. We have quarantine rules now. And look at this. You are asked to aid in enforcing them. You need to tattle on your neighbors now if they're not doing the rules. Good grief. Here's my sign. I didn't make it up. Wear a mask or go to jail. Okay. So it wasn't really funny. It was tragic. It was terrifying. I mean, people were dying all over the place. It was really, really bad. It was a horrible situation. And you think these people had survived a war, for goodness sakes. So many of them died in the war, and the ones that made it came home and got sick, and then they died. It was a really hard time. Really hard time. And one of the things that I picked up out of this is that when hard times come, big old crisis, people try to come up with solutions. Try this medicine. Try this breathy, nosy thing that makes you look like an elephant. Try the, do this, smoke tobacco, this, whatever those were. Because we want something that makes us feel safe. And the truth is, there's no way to be perfectly safe. The world we live in is a dangerous world. And there are dangers out there. However, those of us who belong to God, we don't have anything to worry about. The Bible says God knows the number of our days. So if he knows, that means he already knows what day we're going to die. And if it's not our day, it's not our day. So, don't be afraid. You can leave your future in the hands of your Father who loves you very much. And he will take care of it. Now, don't go out and play in the road and all that kind of stuff. Don't be stupid. But you try as much as you can, but don't spend your life scared half to death of something that might happen and might not. Because then what if it does happen? What good did it do to be scared? All you did was ruin your last moments, Go play with the baby squirrel. Have a good time. This one cracks me up the most. In case the right-wingers felt unrepresented, here is an anti-mask meeting to protest against the unhealthy mask ordinance. It's not right to be wearing masks for a long time. It's bad for your health. You're going to have breathing trouble. So I was like, oh my word. We thought that was a brand new thing.
I kind of grew up wearing masks back then, though. I mean, COVID wasn't that, I got COVID like 3 times and I was fine. So, but this is not.
This is a different thing.
It's different.
But the funny thing is the whole, stay home so you don't get COVID, and now they're going to get together to talk about how, whatever. Maybe we should have stayed home. This one, impetus to home study. So homeschooling went on the rise because you couldn't go places. Oh my word! Here's a vaccine that came out of nowhere, and people are saying, well, we aren't quite sure if it's trustworthy yet, so I don't know. It's too early to draw conclusions. Interesting. I have never heard of this vaccine, so I'm guessing it probably didn't work very well. Probably worked as well as cigarettes did. This one's my favorite. Stop kissing! So they're going to close the schools, motion picture houses, and theaters on account of the prevalence of the epidemic of Spanish influenza. Public gatherings, including liberty rallies, have been ordered stopped, so all those suffragettes need to stay home. The health authorities have recommended that persons refrain from kissing. And if you can't refrain from kissing, you can buy a kissing shield, which is this little device that you can hold in between the two of you so you can still kiss your boyfriend and not get the flu, supposedly. Those didn't go on sale in 2020, so I'm thinking they didn't work out so well. This one is let's just end on a happy note. The house cats are wearing masks.
Is that a joke?
I don't know if they could get influenza or not, but they were protected. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's the end of that. Okay, what do we learn from history? The good, the bad, the otherwise. What do you think? What did you learn from today? That you can apply to your own life. Yes.
Well, not applying to my own life, but if Hitler died, like, in one of the 59 million things that he said he could have died, we wouldn't have had to have World War II.
Isn't it amazing that small things make such a big difference?
I felt bad for him. I was over there feeling bad for him. I should have been like, I want to die.
So one thing that should tell you is the small things make a difference on these people who do very bad things, but the same thing is true on the other side. The small things make a difference in the good direction. And you can be one of the people who make a difference in the good direction, doing the right thing faithfully every day and just being where God wants you to be, doing what God wants you to do. You never know, you might just change the world.